11. Love and the Law. One of the most important of all humanists was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the father of democracy. Rousseau was a tramp, a kept man for Madame de Rohan, and a thoroughly irresponsible man. He lived for many years out of wedlock with Thérèse Levasseur, a hotel employee. 5 children were born to them, and all were immediately carted off by Rousseau to a foundling home. This great expert on child training could not be bothered with children. Rousseau was for virtue, and he tells us that he wept when he thought about it. But in action, he was a totally irresponsible and vicious man. He believed his heart, and the heart of all men, to be good. Organized society, the environment makes men bad. A very typical act of this great humanistic reformer took place in Venice. Rousseau took a prostitute to his room. After she undressed and they both lay down in bed, Rousseau began to beg her to take the path of virtue. He was, of course, in the wrong position for such a plea, but it mattered little to him. For Rousseau, the heart, the feelings of man was everything. Under the influence of such humanistic beliefs, law has been extensively eroded. It is no longer the act of the murderer which is judged, but his feelings or mental state in the commission of the act. Like Rousseau, a murderer may be not guilty by virtue of his mental state. Love, thus, as the great humanistic virtue, has become all-important. Those who belong to the party of love are the holy ones of the humanistic world, even in the commission of crimes. Whereas the Orthodox Christian, as a hate-monger by definition, is guilty even in the non-commission of a crime. Love does appear in the law, but in the context of law, not humanistic feelings. Love of one's neighbour is required by the Mosaic law in Leviticus chapter 19, verses 17 and 18. Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart. Thou shalt in any wise rebuke thy neighbour, and not suffer sin upon him. Thou shalt not avenge, nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbour as thyself. I am the Lord. The Berkeley version renders the latter half of verse 17, lest you incur sin on his account, and the Torah version reads it as, but incur no guilt because of him. The religious authorities during the Second Temple era read it as, but thou shalt bear no sin by reason of it, that is, execute the duty of reproof in such a manner that thou dost not incur sin by it. St. Paul's explanation sums up the matter. Love worketh no ill to his neighbour, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. Romans chapter 13, verse 10. To love one's neighbour means to keep the law in relation to him, working him no ill in word, thought, or deed. If a neighbour's course of action leads to evil or to problems, a word of warning is to be given as a means of preventing him ill. The meaning of neighbour in this passage, Leviticus chapter 19, verses 17 and 18, is a fellow believer. The law of love here gives no grounds for trying to govern our neighbour, nor does it reduce love to a frame of mind. It is a principle which is manifested as a totality in word, thought, and deed. The Bible is not dualistic in its view of man. It does not recognize a good heart with evil deeds. Man is a unit. As a sinner, he is clearly evil. As a redeemed man, he is in process of sanctification and thus manifests both good and evil. But an evil thought begets an evil deed as clearly as a godly thought begets a godly act. Rousseau mistook his fantasies and illusions concerning his heart and mind as the reality concerning himself, whereas he was evil in heart and mind, and therefore in his fantasies. Every imagination of the thoughts of man's heart is only evil continually. Genesis chapter 6, verse 5. And it is a part of that evil imagination for man to think well of his evil. Because man is a sinner, he cannot take the law into his own hands. Thou shalt not avenge. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. Because man is not God, man cannot therefore assume the judgment seat of God to judge men in terms of himself. We cannot condemn men for their likes or dislikes in terms of ourselves. We can judge them in relationship to God, whose law alone governs and judges all men. Personal judgment is forbidden. Judge not, Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. But we are required to judge righteous judgment. John chapter 7, verse 24. The Pauline principle states the issue clearly with respect to love. First, it works no ill to his neighbour. Second, love is the fulfilling of the law. To work ill to one's neighbour is thus clearly forbidden. It is a form of killing our neighbour's life and liberty. The fact that both life and liberty are in view in this law appears from the case laws of Scripture. Thus, the only kind of slavery permitted is voluntary slavery, as Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 15 and 16 makes very clear. Biblical law permits voluntary slavery because it recognizes that some people are not able to maintain a position of independence. To attach themselves voluntarily to a capable man and to serve him, protected by law, is thus a legitimate way of life, although a lesser one. The master then assumes the role of the benefactor, the bestower of welfare, rather than the state, and the slave is protected by the law of the state. A runaway slave thus cannot be restored to his master. He is free to go. The exception is the thief or criminal who is working out his restitution. The Code of Hammurabi decreed death for men who harboured a runaway slave. The biblical law provided for the freedom of the slave. The slave in the master's house shall dwell, in that place which he shall choose in one of thy gates, where he liketh him best, where he is most suited. Thou shalt not oppress him. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 16. Kidnapping a fellow believer to sell him as a slave, that is, to a foreigner or foreign country, since he could not legally be sold at home, is a capital offence, punished without exception by death. Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 7. The death penalty applied not only to the kidnapper, but to his associates who received or sold the person. Exodus chapter 21, verse 16. The force of this law is all the clearer when we realize that biblical law had no prison sentences. Men either died as criminals or made restitution. Biblical law requires a society of free men whose freedom rests in responsibility. Biblical law protected a man who accidentally killed a man, as in the case of two men chopping wood, and the axe head of one flying off and killing the other. Cities of refuge protected the man from a blood feud. Deuteronomy chapter 19 verses 1 to 10. Compare Exodus chapter 21 verse 13. Numbers chapter 35 verses 9 to 34. Murder, however, was punishable by death. Exodus chapter 21 verses 12 to 14. Verses 18 to 32. Leviticus chapter 24 verses 17 to 22. Numbers chapter 35 verses 30 to 33. Deuteronomy chapter 19 verses 11 to 13. And no exception to this sentence was permitted by law. The test of love was thus the act of love. Love works no ill to the neighbour, and love means the keeping or fulfilling of the law in relationship to other men. Love is thus the law-abiding thought, word, and act. Where there is no law, there is also no love. Adulterous persons do not love their spouses, although they may claim to do so. They may enjoy their wives or husbands as well as their lovers, but love is the keeping of the law. Humanistic man, having forsaken law, must then logically forsake love also. There are already evidences of this. Leonel Rubinoff, himself a humanist, has described the modern problem of evil in The Pornography of Power. As a reviewer summarizes Rubinoff's thesis, it is, however, in his analysis of Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that the assumption underlying the pornography of power is most readily grasped. Of Stevenson's portrayal of the ambivalence of human nature, Rubinoff writes, Dr. Jekyll the humanist originally creates Mr. Hyde, in itself a thoroughly evil act, so that the forces of evil incarnated in a Hyde can be scientifically studied and eventually banished from the human psyche. So confident is Jekyll in the iron strength of his own virtue that he sincerely believes he can give birth to evil without being corrupted by it. Alas, the virtuous Jekyll is no match for the satanic Hyde. Once the demon has been released, the angel seeks every excuse to descend himself into the depths of depravity. Few men can comfortably contemplate the concept of the natural supremacy of evil over good in humanity. The Judeo-Christian tradition eases the anguish by holding out the hope of salvation through the exercise of a semblance of free will in the worldly fight with the devil's forces. What is an increasingly secular age to do with the knowledge that evil is an inextricable part of man's nature? Face it, says Rubinoff. Bring it out into the open. Thus, as some humanistic thinkers are beginning to recognize, man faces the world not with love and goodness, but with evil. The more humanistic man becomes, the more justice, authority, and legitimacy fade from the world. Lawlessness increasingly governs national and international affairs. The expression of man's heart and imagination is only evil continually. Rubinoff admits that man's evil urge leads to a demonic use of power, to what he calls the pornography of power. Rubinoff's answer is not love, but evil. The greatest evil in becoming addicted to such pornography, says Rubinoff, is that it stunts the growth of the imagination, the only instrument by which man can truly understand, and so live with, the despairing truth of his dual nature. As example of how to use the creative imagination in facing up to evil, Rubinov singles out Jean Genet and Norman Mailer. Much of their writing, he says, is essentially an effort to create positive values by confronting the negative and the irrational within themselves, living with it, and turning it into art. Like most programs for self-improvement, Rubinov's ideas are easier to talk about than to apply. On one level, his book could encourage low-grade scatology as a form of salvation. On another, the pornography of power offers an aesthetic substitute for religion, by which men less creative than Genet and Mailer must try to grope their way to self-knowledge with the aid of the artist's images of evil. Rubinov's answer is that we become artistic rather than scientific jackals, creating a legion of Hydes. He proposes that we enter a world of love and law by embracing evil, by expressing it boldly and freely as an artistic and creative venture. It is a program of sinning to make grace abound. What Rubinov has expressed, his humanistic generation is practicing. Students, slum dwellers, diplomats, politicians, clergymen, teachers, and others all now practice a lawless doctrine of evil as the higher law and the higher love. Since the humanistic doctrine of love is antinomian through and through, it is inescapably, therefore, the love of evil. It is, thus, a logical development of humanistic love that it should become evil incarnate. Love, without law, is, in essence, the affirmation of evil, and its manifestation